Hey guys, this will be video 12 for the how to design build a 59 Korina Les Paul replica using Stuart McDonald templates. And I'm going to try to work from a point list and really keep this thing just that on point because I want to try to get my videos back down to about 30 minutes of video so they're more manageable for the guys out there and the girls. I think there's a 2% of my viewing clientele are female, so that's pretty cool. So as far as reaching out to the girls, appreciate you dropping in. That's pretty cool. Uh, what we're going to be talking about in this video is the headstock that I elected to go with, the ears and all that jazz, and what makes me, do the things I do, or not do the things that I had considered doing. So, and then we're going to be talking about string path, fitting the nut, and then the headstock taper, which this is the headstock taper from here to here, in case I forget. About 5/8 of an inch down to 9/16 of an inch is fairly safe. A little bit less than that is acceptable, but I don't not much if you're doing taper. But if you get fatter than that, if you got over 5/8 of an inch, your tuner shaft will not reach. It'll be too short, especially if you're using Spurzell tuners. Okay, so we'll talk about stuff like that. And then we'll talk about the stinger, to do a stinger or not to do a stinger. And the funny thing about this neck, as I was preparing for this video, I got to thinking, I thought, well, this neck being a scarf joint headstock, even though it's incredibly well concealed, requires a stinger. And I got thinking, I thought, one could really make the argument that this guitar neck was built around the stinger. Because if you think about it, you're not about to, build a guitar and then have that scarf joint be shown. And a lot of the guitars that they build out there, they'll do the scarf joint way back here, and they'll allow and I'm not digressing. I don't think I'm digressing. They will allow the scarf joint, whatever degree pitch they put the headstock on, they will make that cut back here. Just see how that's cut right there, whatever angle that is. They'll make that cut based on whatever pitch they want the headstock to be on. That's an absolute brilliant way to build a guitar, especially if it's an affordable guitar, or either you're working with minimal material, et cetera, because in the yacht industry and master woodworking industry, I don't know if they do it in furniture building, but the scarf joint, I think the ratio is 12 to 1 or 11 to 1. As long as you do, you wouldn't want to do a 45 on a scarf joint. It's not going to be very strong or as strong. But if you do a 12 to 1, 11 to 1, or something like that, or like a 15-degree pitch, 16-degree pitch, 17-degree pitch, I'm exaggerating, that is an exceptional scarf joint. I'm going to stop because I'll get too detailed talking about scarf joints. But this scarf joint is way up here in the headstock. It's all concealed, but there's nothing wrong with doing a scarf joint back here. But be extremely careful if you're building a quarter sewn neck, because a quarter sewn neck with a scarf joint that is back here might be difficult to conceal unless you're really, really working from a board that's from the same location of the board. If you're fitting a completely different board from a different part of the tree, the quarter sewn grains, as I just covered in the last video, the quarter sewn annular rings might not marry up very well. But if you're doing a plain sewn neck, where, see, this is quarter sewn where the growth rings are going up and down. But when you flip it over 90 degrees, is that right? Yeah, 90 degrees, then this becomes plain sewn. And if you do a plain sewn scarf joint on a plain sewn lower, those conceal extremely well, because when you come up here and start doing the round over, it has this V pattern going on anyway, identical to what you would see in kind of like I don't think you'll see it in this, but you see it in maple. But plain sewn scarf joint headstocks are incredible. So, and I spent a little bit too much time talking about that, but I'll just be able to check that off my list, so we won't talk about that stuff in the future anymore. So, what did I like to do here? Let me check the time. 5 minutes. What did I like to do? In the last video, I had mentioned, yeah, I'm really torn. I don't know what I want, blah, blah, blah. I think I'm going to go with the wide ears. That way, that won't paint me into a corner. But I went ahead and really asked myself, where's this guitar going? And I had already covered this in one of the videos, and this is not a digression. This is critical thought for building your guitar, because what you decide to do in a certain area, it could greatly or will greatly define what you do in another part of the design or the guitar. We'd already talked about, or I had already mentioned, I just didn't feel like doing a custom. Not because I can't do it. I can do the custom binding, but I don't feel like it. I'm not in the mood to do 7 pieces of binding here, 5 pieces of binding on the back, 7 pieces of binding or 5 pieces of binding at the headstock, when it doesn't have any bearing on the tone at all whatsoever. So if I elected to not go with the custom, then that's what I had mentioned about sometimes it's easier to just find out what is it that you don't want. And I don't want that. I love that. It's beautiful. It's everything about it. It's incredibly valuable, but I don't want it. So I'm not being difficult. I'm just saying once I realized I don't want that, I don't want to fool with that. So it solved the problem for me, and it took me in the world of the small headstock. And I don't know if I've ever done a headstock this small. This one is about a 16th of an inch more narrow than this guitar here. It's probably an eighth of an inch more narrow right here than that guitar. And I think it's very close to my all Honduran Les Paul that will be getting the Floyd Rose. But odds are I'm going to be keeping this guitar for myself as well as the Honduran mahogany with the Floyd Rose. So I want them to kind of look alike. I don't want them to be too different. So I was working from the Stuart McDonald templates, obviously, and I had already done a video 12 right after I did video 11, but I erased it. Most of it was just irrelevant information, and it was not very timely. I needed to do a lot more work and just talk about what it was that I had elected to do, which is why this is the new video 12. So I was working from either just throw this down on a board, pull the trigger on the router, and everything is said and done. And I don't know if I covered this in video 11, which I don't think I did, but this template is a bit of an oddity. It's an oddball in that this scarf joints that runs down the scarf joint, this scar that runs down, or the score that runs down the center line. I don't know if this is a mistake, but it's not centered between this point and that point. It's off center considerably in this direction. And if it were offset about a 16th of an inch, I would make the assumption that, well, they're providing this template so you could either do a wide nut guitar, or you could do a narrow nut based on the center line. But when I flipped them over and did the math, it didn't compute. Neither one of them were an actual accurate guitar. But the width of this nut right here is, I think, 44. No, it's 43. So see, this is 43, and that's like your 1 11/16 inch nut. So if you get these templates, proceed with caution, or ask them what is going on, because if this is wrong, they need to be sending me another template so that it makes my job easy to throw that down on a board and just do my job. But everything about this template, everything is off center. And from the center of the score here to that E location versus from the center to that E location, considerable. We're talking like an eighth of an inch. That's a lot. That's visible. Now, my question would be, was that actually Dan's guitar? that they traced? I mean, were they really cowboying the build of those '50s Les Pauls that much? Because if so, that almost lets you know they were, drilling these things by hand and just whatever they thought looked right. Which I don't believe that to be the case at all. So neither here nor there. I had to take that headstock, that that profile that was in front of me, and then go to paper. You know, go to templates, go to drawing. I didn't do all this recently. This is all I've done. This stuff I've done over the course of years, and that's where you're considering ears in relation to the center line, and then we're back to what we elected not to go with, which was that profile. And then you're factoring in things like, I actually took this right here. This was the first time when I started engineering out what was actually going on, where I laid this down and did a pencil tracing, and then I flipped it over based on a center line and did a tracing and started asking myself, man, what is going on with this whole center line viewed from the front versus viewed from the back? And you can see, you might be able to see, it's 1/8 of an inch. And this is, I know this is a lot of conversation, but it's really important. I'll try to segue back into the ears very quickly here. But once I realized that I couldn't really trust that, other than to just start pushing me in a certain direction. Um, that's when I started tracing it on paper and started asking myself, do I even like what I see? Or do I prefer the headstocks that I've designed, which are, these are here. This was where I restored a 1980 Gibson Les Paul Custom. And then I had an actual overlay that he had provided that I did the tracing on for comparative purposes, and then start assessing where were all the tuner locations for the Les Paul Custom in relation to the 59, like that one right there, or the 58, or maybe the 60 the 60 as well. And I started doing all this comparative assessment so that I could determine, did I even like what I saw, or did I want to design my own? And I designed my own. I moved everything. I think these four are in the very close to the original location, but these two right here, I moved them out about a 1/16 of an inch, so that when the especially the high string, when it came off the nut, that it didn't cock in real far. And I'm exaggerating, but I just brought it out to where as soon as it comes off the nut, it stays almost straight. But I didn't want it to turn into like a studio. I didn't want to go that wide. So heavily motivated by a 59, yet re-engineered to be far more functional. And however, I did maintain the exact historical distance from the top of the nut to the top of the mustache, or whatever it's called, or it's like more like an open book. And a lot of guys used to call it like an open Bible, which I thought was pretty cool. So maybe it was an open Bible. But nonetheless, uh, that's what's on that guitar, and that's what's on that guitar, except that guitar is just a little bit more narrow. And then this one, going full circle, we'll talk about string path here in just a second. This one, I did bring in just a little bit more. So this is a lot closer to your historical 50s profile, because this is 17-degree pitch. And man, can you ever see it? It's just so beautiful, so beautiful. So that when I'm working on my designs right here, a lot of time, or for the most part, always, I'm not necessarily worried too much about what does it look like, or what does it, what is the scale, unless I'm working with a board that was left over that is a certain dimension, and that's all I've got. I can't turn this glue up into a Les Paul Custom. It's just replica. It's just not going to happen. Nor can I turn it into a D'Angelico or a Robert Benedetto. It just, I don't have the wood for it. I did have the wood for it, but that's what I meant by I didn't I didn't make that decision based on the lack of material or the material in front of me as much as I based it on the fact that, oh yeah, I had two of these, and I could, if I had enough material, I could build another one of these necks. So I almost digressed, but anyway, it's all about string path, and then if you draw it on paper, because when I was working on my penguin replica, the penguin replica is an enormous headstock. It's like it might be a little bit smaller than the white falcon, but I don't think so. But it's such a big headstock, you got to be really careful about these strings, especially the E. Well, the truth, every one of them come off the nut, and they're on way too much angle. And this particular headstock, I brought it in as much as I could without losing the authentic, 50s big, massive Falcon esque looking headstock. But I got to tell you, it might show in the angle. It's right at the threshold of those flaring, flaring way too much. Okay. So when you're getting ready to build your headstock, don't just try to you know make don't just try to draw a pretty picture. Let's look at it from a functional standpoint, especially if you're running a Bigsby and you're pretty fairly aggressive with a Bigsby. Uh, anyway, all right, let me check the time. 16 minutes, man. I was scared to look at the timer. I was afraid it was going to say like 25 minutes. If that were the case, I would probably erase the video and start over. So let me see if I can get back on point and really clarify what it is we need to talk about. The ears. Did I talk about the ears enough? I don't think I've really talked about the ears at all because let's say once I elected to turn this headstock into the 59. Get this stuff off the table so there's nothing in the background. That's where I pull out these type templates here, because keep in mind, you're working with, that's all you've got right there. You've got this real straight stick that you've just tapered, but you've got this real long center line, and you've got to start determining, well, how much am I going to need on either side? Now, that's not the center, but how you do that is you convert over to the actual headstock that you want, that you've elected to go with. You create a half template. And that half template needs to be pretty much exact. Let's see if I can get it in location. See, I still haven't finished shaping this one, but it's very close. You create that half template, and all you've got is this straight board here with a center line pencil mark. You put your half template on there, and if you want to, you can temporarily tape it, and then you just start interviewing pieces of wood, and you start asking yourself, would that one fit? And it's like, well, as long as you put it in on an angle. But if you're going in straight, which you do need to, I would try to don't do any tapering. Try to keep everything very straight, especially if you're not doing a stinger on the back. And the only reason that we're having to do the stinger is because of that scarf joint there. This Korina matches up, the Limba matches up so beautifully that it wouldn't even require a stinger. And for the most part, once the tuners went on there, I don't even know if I'd be able to find the glue line. So, but you've got that half template hanging off the side, and then you start going through your box of boards and asking yourself what will fit, what will work, color wise, end grain wise, and to go straight to the finish line. What's the most important consideration when selecting that ear right there? Just that ear. Believe it or not, the most important thing is what does the end grain look like in relation to that center board end grain right there, so that once we start doing all of our shape work, that it looks is as close to the original as possible. You wouldn't want to have an end grain going, one way, and then all of a sudden your ear goes the other, because every time the player looks down, and they'll see it. And that's annoying to look down at a great guitar that you might love, but you look down and you see that really poor, marrying up of two different woods. When it might have been that all they did was they put the board on upside down. So pay extreme attention to those things right there. That's so important. The second most important thing would be matching that one right there. I couldn't get this one to match up as good as I wanted it to, but at least it's on the treble side. And nonetheless, it's still pretty. But what's funny is when you look at it from the end, okay, see, this is the one that's not necessarily, well, not yet. I haven't shaped it yet. It might surprise me. It might blend in much better. But when you look at them, I'm going to have to flip it upside down so it'll stay on the camera. But when you look at them from the end, that's incredible. I can't, right now, I'm not being funny. I really can't. I think it's right there, but I can't find it. I can see this one only because I'm looking for it. There's a line right there, but nonetheless, at least these are they're kind of wavy, but for the most part, they're going on that pitch right there, and so is this one. So and before this video is over, I'm actually going to take the Extreme Power Thin or the CA glue, which is very thin, which this is what I always call the jet glue, and we're going to saturate this end to guarantee that it really seals it and gives it strength. Why? Because the Korina is notorious for splitting. It's a very, very dry wood. I won't seal this one because I want to do more shaping, but anyway, we'll do that before the video ends. So I spent a lot of time talking about ears, and maybe I didn't really give you a lot of information that is helpful, but you're just going to have to get behind the material that's in front of you and assess what you have left over as drops and determine which ones are going to be the most beautiful. And you can even see this right here, where I've got that T with the arrow pointed forward. I know for a fact that that's where I was initially planning on going with that one right there. And you can look at the end grain and you can see my reasoning. I was very close, but this one actually married up better because what happened was I had another board identical to this, but just a little bit bigger, and allowed me to get the treble out of the top side, and then move. Then I was able to move the board over parallel on the same plane and drop down and get the bass side. That way, that guaranteed me that it was almost like cut that side off and that side off and put one side over here and one side over there. That's really going to guarantee that the end grain color and everything looks really exceptional. Okay, so this is probably a fairly boring video for most of you guys that are into entertainment, but for those of you who are truly building a guitar that you want to be just, off the charts beautiful, you're going to have to think on this level and really consider what it is you're gluing up. Okay. What else should I talk about ears? Minimum use versus best match. I already kind of covered it. Basically, I had this enormous board here, and I'll cover this briefly. Let's say I had this enormous board, and it was real. Let's say it was a really big chunk, and it was just a bar none perfect match. But I had this little scrapper right here that had absolutely no use, but it was the perfect minimum dimension board to do the job. But it's still a beautiful match. It's still quarter sawn and all that jazz. This one would have been perfect, but this one's really beautiful. Now, and here's where you had to make the decision as the luthier. If I'm building a $15,000 jazz guitar for a client, he's getting this right here, or she's getting this. It's going to make me sick because it's possibly going to cost me a neck that I could have built for myself. Doesn't matter. I'm building a high-end guitar. But if I'm building a guitar for myself, and I know that 3 days from now, I'm not even going to remember whether I did a scarf joint up there or not once the stinger's painted, then I'm going to use this piece right here as long as it's really beautiful and it works well, but not at the expense of that curve right there, that compound corner. So hope that should make really perfect sense, because it just depends on the job that's in front of you, and or also, you know, how critical the client is, because the client might say, no, you know, I don't want a clear coat guitar anyway. I want it to be all sunburst and fogged to black, and you can hide all that stuff. Well, as long as you communicate with your client, they might say, well, what does it matter? We're going to paint all that headstock black anyway. You know, we're doing the stinger, right? You're not trying to talk me out of the stinger, right? That's correct. So it's not that you're trying to cover your, you know what, or hide anything. You're just working with the job at hand. Okay. All right. A lot of conversation here, a lot of information. Let me get that off the table so I'll stop talking about it. Okay. The next thing will be. I don't have it written down here, but that prompts me to talk about the headstock taper and hiding um, the scarf joint. Okay, um, and the scarf joint basically travels from this point here up to about that point right there. So what that scarf joint is that original line concealed behind the ear is parallel with the upper surface of the lower. You know, should make perfect sense. Again, most scarf joints are way back here, but they're seen. My scarf joint, see, this is the original neck going all the way out here, all the way out here, nearly halfway out the headstock. And then once I do my scarf joint, now this board right here, I do have to get that back on the table. This center board that got glued in right here obviously got cut on the appropriate pitch here, which would have been 17 degrees, or 90 degrees minus 17. Is that 83? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But just 90 degrees minus 17 degree pitch, and then that got glued like that. And it's a flat right here. It's a flat right there. It makes for exceptional clamping. I had 4 C clamps clamping all that together. But where I'm going is what is important. I didn't just go with a real thick board. I didn't go with just a real thick board out here and then cut it on an angle. I took that piece right there is if you could say it might have been right there, it wasn't, but it was basically just laid down on the appropriate pitch. And then what that did, that presented a certain end grain that I then began determining, am I matching the end grain here, or am I matching the end grain right here? And as I just clarified, I'm always matching the end grain right there. And I'm doing the best I can to match the end grain right there. But I'm looking at all 4 locations in tandem in making my decisions. Because if this ear was to glue on like this and it was acceptable, ask yourself, are you sure it wouldn't glue on like this? Because you may realize that, oh wow, I was looking at it upside down. Okay. So hidden behind the ear is the scarf joint, and we've already covered how we'll conceal it with the stinger, and then we will conceal it with our maple overlay or whatever overlay we elect to go with. And from a structural standpoint, you have this ear glued on here, that ear glued on there, these 2 scarf joined together. It is just, I'm not going to do it, but it is just as strong, if not stronger. It might shock you. It might be stronger if it did take a fall and it took a blow like that. I can assure you it's not going to blow apart right there. It's going to break like your traditional guitar, where it's going to break right back here. Okay, so that was a ton of information, but I think extremely valuable information if you're really if you're really thinking about the structural aspects versus the design aspects. Okay. So we talked about hiding our craftsmanship, which we just did. I think we did a good job. Or I think I did a good job. I'm happy with that. Now, small headstock, ears, scarf joints, string path. We talked about the string path enough for me to just be able to clarify that what I would recommend if you're not good with a mechanical pencil but you know you're going to be building this guitar, well then just go ahead and buy the nut. Buy the nut. They're like $10 to $15, $20 according to what you're going with. Buy the nut. If you don't have your fretboard yet, maybe cut a little block of wood that is the actual accurate true to the final point thickness. It doesn't have to be the correct width. We're just talking. We're going to use these for like scaling and verifying that our lower is the proper thickness and stuff like that. But we know that based on the nut, if you get the nut pre-cut, just be careful if you're buying these online, because I bought these two bone nuts off of eBay and the pictures showed them as a right hand nut, right hand guitar, but the guy sent me two left hand nuts. And I sent him a message back and I said, man, this is the reason I paid you this is so it would make my job easy. And he was like, oh my God, they're the same. You're being ridiculous. And I wanted to tell him what an idiot he was, but I just canned it and let it go. But nonetheless, this one is set up for a nut. That's why that slot is wider. But I guess we could turn around this. Well, no, we can't, because see, these are cut on the appropriate pitch or taper off of the end of the nut. And then you could use those in order to determine your string path. Okay. If that was a correct nut, then I would be able to assess, where's the string path going. And if you want to really split hairs, you could go ahead and drop one of the tuners in and put a little clamp on it, and then actually take a guitar string and pull that string across there and pull it and ask yourself, is it really, really what you want? Especially if you've never built a guitar before, maybe build your first neck out of poplar. I've already clarified this, and then get the feel for all of the jigs, all the operations, which operations should have been done before another one or after another one, and things like that. And then do all that layout and all that design work. Then once you move to your really high dollar wood, you're really confident that, yeah, I know if I pull off of this center line exactly, let me put it on where it needs to be. Okay, I'm pretty confident right there. That's exactly 20 millimeter. So I'm giving away my secrets. Exactly 20 millimeter. 20 millimeter off the center is a flawless guitar. That's an incredible headstock as far as the path of the E and E. 2 down, 4 to go. And it gets a little bit more forgiving as you get up here, as long as the headstock doesn't get too wide. This is why I've mentioned in the past, Paul Reed Smith was a genius, because in essence he flipped the whole string layout 180 degrees, and he brought the E, A, D, and the D and the G in closer. And it's just a brilliant design the way he was able to bring his headstock in more narrow. Ovation had done this back in maybe the 60s and 70s. So he wasn't the first, but I think he was the first to put it on this guitar design and make it look really attractive. Now, I don't own a PRS. I've never owned one, but nonetheless, just be careful about getting this spread too far apart. Let me go ahead and give you some dimensions here. So 20 millimeter off the center of the first one. This one might be the same. Okay, this one's 20. It's under 21, but not much. So, but take heed to that, because it's incredible what will happen if you start getting off a half a millimeter. I'm going to say it's 20 and a half millimeter. It's not. It's a little bit over 20 and a half millimeter. Let's go ahead and get this one out of the way. 22. So you see, so 22 millimeter. So let's, for ease of math, 20 millimeter, 21 millimeter, 22 millimeter. I'm holding a real tight pattern. I'm holding a very tight pattern. I say I am. I mean, all I'm doing was just picking up. I say that I may have changed it more than I remember. Let's just keep geeking out here, because this is the kind of stuff that when you're in your shop and you're building your guitar, this kind of, you know what, will drive you over the edge, because you'll be online trying to look at pictures and ascertain, do you like what you see, and going straight to the finish line. um, I am Both of these sides up here are about 1 millimeter in closer to the center line than the historical 50s guitar, or at least on that side of the profile. I mean, template. Once I flip the template over here, and I'm going to sound like I'm complaining, now mine are further out, or farther out, so whatever. Anyway, so spending way too much time with this, but this is, I have spent days, as you can see, with the drawings and the sketches and everything, and the scissor and the pencil and the paper and the ink and for every template that I show you, there's probably been 15 or 20 that I started with that got X'd and thrown away. But that was my final guitar, and I love. And also, you can just kind of look at it and ask yourself, yeah, does that look like a, you know what? It's like, yeah, it does. It's looking really good. And let's say I decided to turn this into a 335 rather than a flying V. Well, man, I could cut this stuff off and glue the ears up there, and within about 24 hours, I could have this turned into a 335. Why do I say a 335? Because it would be connecting the body at this one connects at the 18th fret, but basically, I think the 335 is at the 19th fret. Okay, so you see what I'm talking about, and then you can start asking yourself, okay, from a functional standpoint, look how similar. Yeah, you see what's going on here? Let me do that again. This is good theory. See how close we are? Very close. These are a little bit tighter in because I made this a little bit smaller. Oh, and I'm so glad I thought of that. Let's look at this dimension here. And let's see if they're the same. Yeah, they're the same. They should be the same. I'm looking at right at about 34 and a half millimeter. Okay. And I think that's 15/16. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. 1 5/16. 1 5/16 of an inch is not right. It's between 1 5/16 and 1 3/8. Okay. Oh, wow. Way too much conversation there. 38 minutes of headstock theory. And that's probably going to be the end of this video. Let's see, what else should I talk about? Headstock taper. We've already talked about the headstock taper. 5/8 of an inch to 9/16 is about standard. It's really good. This length right here, I'm going to, let me see if I've got this in metric. I do have a scale. This is going to be from the top of the nut. I'll give you the metric first. I guess it would be, 176 centimeters. Is that right? Or 17? I don't know. I don't know my metric very well. I know that would be 10 millimeter, 20, 30. Yeah, I guess it'd be 176 millimeter, 17 centimeters, 17.6 or something like that. So 176, yeah, 176 millimeter should be good. This is the top of the nut. 6 and 7/8. 6 and 7/8. Basically 80 millimeter. About 70.5 millimeter. It's about 129 millimeter from that point to that point. Yeah, I'm not going to do the imperial because those of us in the States, we know easily how to convert over. But I know there's a lot of guys that watch the video that are they're working primarily in metric. So and believe it or not, this is kind of comical, and I'll try not to go off a tangent here, but I always work in imperial in just everything that I do. But there's a lot of times when I'm building a guitar, man, it's a hell of a lot easier for me to find the middle of 43, find the center of 43 millimeter rather than find the center of 1/11/16 of an inch because I don't even want to try to think because I get a headache trying to think. Sometimes I get really lost in the imperial, and whenever I'm laying out a scale, you better believe it. Every time I lay out a scale, I lay it out in metric. I don't ever even consider the imperial. I do not ever consider the imperial when I'm laying out a scale. I'm doing everything metric. So we talked about string path, fitting the nut. I don't know if we really need to talk about fitting. Well, we talked about the nut enough to know that there is a string spacing difference, and that's another theory in itself because some guys offset them, which actually I do. I do offset them, and I'm not even going to talk about it because I'll just confuse myself. Oh, I promised we were going to seal the end of that headstock with a little bit of jet glue. And I tell you what, I'm going to stop opening this thing with my teeth because I'm still dealing with with an enormous amount of thin jet glue that got all over my right lip. I had to take 120 grit sandpaper and sand that you know what off. And like an idiot, let me get it right. I'll do it upside down so I can try to keep it in the camera. I really need to be up. I'll stand it up like this. The crap's probably going to get all over. I'm certainly having trouble controlling it as if I were just doing the job. But I'm trying to keep it in the camera to show you what you see when your guitar starts to come alive. It's really beautiful. It's very encouraging also when you see the fruits of your labor. Now, a little bit of trivia there for you. I got lucky on that by putting that toilet paper on the face side because the face side is going to get a cover. But if this was going to be a clear coat, you might want to be real careful about putting it back here because it might get in your grain and get you in a little bit of trouble. And I'm going to do a little bit more because it's a little bit wet, and that will guarantee that it soaks in a little bit. I hope that's in the camera okay. Don't overload it because this, you know what, you'll lose control. But just use gravity to your advantage. And see how it's getting blotchy right there? It's a little bit dry. um, we're definitely at a point to where be careful, because it'll all of a sudden, like it's doing there in the middle, all of a sudden it'll just start laying on the surface. And I think we're in good shape. Now I'm guaranteed that my headstock's not going to start splitting, because if I get a phone call and somebody wants me to build a guitar, this guitar's going to get shelved, and it may sit there for 6 months and not get any attention. If that were the case, I'd go ahead and clear coat the whole thing, even the tenon and all that jazz, to really get it under control. But happy with that. Let's see what it looks like in the camera. Trying to do the best I could to, knock off the glare and get that to pick up. And I allowed it to turn into a way too lengthy video, but I think, as I say, it was for a worthy cause. We sealed the top of the headstock. We talked about the stinger. I think we talked about the stinger enough to know what a stinger is. I will cover this briefly since it's already a long video, because if you're still watching it, that means you're really serious about building a guitar. And when I was building guitars first starting out, I couldn't get enough information. But you can see how the stinger is beautiful in its own right. Now that's for a custom, the big headstock, but in its own right, actually the stinger would be. The stinger is defined. Oh yeah, this is good conversation. I did consider talking about this. The stinger is defined by finding, the perfect radius. And I want to say this is a 4, I think it's a 3 and 15/16 inch radius. Yes. It's a 3 and 15/16 inch radius for the custom. Now, I don't know if that's going to remain for this one, since it's such a more narrow headstock, but just cut out a few pieces like this and let this corner down here and that corner down there, and then the center line, define the 3 points that you connect. And that's how you do your stinger. I personally, I hope that's in the camera. Let me put it where it needs to be. I personally love that. And so I'm very happy with the fact that it is a 3 and 15/16 inch radius, not diameter. Okay, so then you take that and you convert it over to a positive space. What I call that a negative space template. So when you're looking at negative space versus positive space, then you create your positive space template and you lay it up there. And then you ask yourself, where is the stinger going to end? And it's going to end right at about the first fret. Yeah, this is good. This is good conversation. This is very good information. Okay? Because these are things that you might look at it. And I didn't really get this from anyone in particular. It's just from building jazz guitars for so long. I did a lot of stingers on the back and just kind of got a feel for what looked good. This may not be what they ever used on this particular guitar, but I do know that a lot of your big body jazz guitars, that's about what the stinger looked like. Okay. All right. Just going to stop talking. And no sense in talking about the truss rod covers, because that's kind of a afterthought to some degree, but it is fairly critical that this is very important. If you've never done this before, buy a truss rod cover, buy the nut, maybe machine a little upper part of a fretboard, get out your tracing paper and your pen and your paper and your straight edge. Just start laying things on paper. Okay. And asking yourself, do you like what you see? Or do you want to try to improve on the 1959 Les Paul? and then start filling in the blanks around those parts right there, because those components are very much a, you know, a centric, what's the word, instrumental part of the entire design. You're not going to get around a truss rod location, a nut location, a fretboard location, a pitch of a headstock, a all, you know, in other words, just a guitar, whether it's classical, cut for classical tuners, or cut for, you know, traditional tuners. Okay, or maybe you're doing a 7-string guitar and you're gonna put 4 up here and 3 down here, and then you have to make the determination to take these 4 that are on the top and bring them in as tight as I can, and then these on the bottom, open these 3 up as far as I can, so that my headstock doesn't get goofy and big, just because I didn't think to consider, what if I went with a smaller tuner knob up here than I did on the bottom. And it drives me crazy to see these jazz guitar builders that don't think on that level. They think, well, you just have to lay it out exactly at 1 3/8 of an inch. No, you don't, man. You could have laid these out at 1 1/4 center, and you could have laid these out at 1 7/16 of an inch, and then keep that headstock under control. Okay. A lot of good theory there. All right, I appreciate you guys checking in, and I will see you in the next video, because there's nothing else left to talk about that I know of. Okay, thanks guys. See you in the next video.